Today we're going to talk about courageous worship. Now, we might not think of worship as something that is courageous or something that would take a lot of courage, but yet for the three Hebrew young people in this story, it sure did. That their worship was an act of courage. It was an act of bravery to worship the one true God. So let's pick up our story in Daniel chapter 3. You'll turn there with me, Daniel chapter 3. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whosoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their clothes were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who was able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And may the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word. Father, thank you for your words you have given us, and thank you that you are faithful to your servants, that you are faithful to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you showed your power to a pagan king who challenged it. And Father, may we realize that even today, you are in control, and no one can bind you. And it is in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. So we come first to worship or else in verses 1 through 7. And we see here that Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, and it was huge. It was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. And to put that in our units of measurement, that'd be 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So this would have been something huge. And it was an image of gold, so could have been overlaid with gold. You see that several times in the Bible that they'll talk about, the golden this or that, and you see when it was made, it was overlaid with gold. But this image would have been huge, and then it was set up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So somewhere there was a plain, and he set this image up there, and he called together all of these government officials from all the provinces. So we're not sure what the image was. I mean, it seems kind of interesting that Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 had a dream of a statue, and the top part was gold. And so maybe he got the idea from this that, well, I'm going to make a statue of all gold. And we don't know, was the statue of one of his gods? Was it some obelisk? Was it a statue of Nebuchadnezzar? Although the Babylonians usually didn't try and worship their kings as gods as other cultures did. But we're not told what exactly this image was, but it was this huge image, and they were all brought together to worship it. So evidently Nebuchadnezzar was trying to solidify power in his kingdom. That if they could all be unified in worshiping this statue, then they would bring unity to the empire. That there would be some form of unity. And Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't expect any objection to this except from someone who was not loyal to him, because for a pagan that has many gods, what's one more god? What's worshiping one more? So Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't understand the Jews' objection, saying, well, no, our God has forbidden us to worship any other god because, well, there is no other God. There is only one God. As we saw in the confession in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that they confess that Yahweh, their God, Yahweh is one. There is only one God. And so the Jews would not worship any other. But Nebuchadnezzar called them all together, said, whenever you hear the sound of the music, and they list all of these instruments, that some of them even have Greek names, so it would have been instruments from all over, would have been quite the musical experience. That he called this together and said, when you hear the music play, then you will bow down and worship this image. And if you don't, see this furnace over here? And maybe that was the furnace used to melt all the gold that they used to overlay it. Then you will be thrown into this furnace if you won't do it. And that was a way of execution that was used in those times. And so they were commanded to do that. They were commanded to worship. Now we may wonder, well, how does this apply to us today? Well, idolatry is still around today. We are still tempted to worship idols, even in America. Except our idols usually aren't statues of gold. They're little green pictures of dead presidents or it's fame, or beauty, or something else, or even smartphones, yeah, that we can have something as an idol, and it's anything we put in God's spot. It can be anything. We can even set ourselves up as idols, which if we really knew ourselves, why would we worship ourselves? But yet sometimes we do that. Idolatry is still around today, and yet sometimes we are tempted to give in just to keep the peace. Sometimes like, is this really a big deal? Is it really a big deal to give in on this point or that point? And, is it a big deal to give in and worship right along with the culture? Well, yes, it is. And that temptation is there. And, well, our temptation isn't as strong as if you don't, you'll get thrown into a fiery furnace. But yet the temptation is still there to just give in and go along with culture and do whatever culture demands and just think, well, we'll get along better if we do that. So that temptation is still there. Then we come to the accusation and the answer. And so some of the Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Now the Chaldeans, they're used sometimes in the book of Daniel, like a special class of astrologer or wise man, but it's also the ethnicity that was the ruling class in the empire of Babylon. That Nebuchadnezzar would be a Chaldean, his dad was a Chaldean, and the other kings were Chaldeans. And so these Chaldeans then, they saw in the big crowd that, whoa, those three didn't bow down. And evidently Nebuchadnezzar didn't see it. And so they wanted to go and tell Nebuchadnezzar about these three that did not bow down. And so they came and maliciously accused the Jews. And the word picture there in the original language is like taking bites out of them, or we might say made mincemeat out of them, or something like that. And they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." And they reminded him about his law and what he said. And, didn't you say that, king? And he's probably thinking, you just heard the herald say that 10 minutes ago. Why are you reminding me of this? And they said, well, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So do you think this could have been motivated by jealousy? You've got these foreigners over the province of Babylon and not us Chaldeans. And so that jealousy may have been brewing for a while, and finally, aha, we can go and accuse them. Kind of like we see later with Daniel, that they, in the Persian Empire, they wanted to accuse him, and so they looked and finally found, well, if we trick the king into making a law against his religion, we know he'll practice his religion, so we'll finally be able to get him. So they had them, and they told him, these men, no king, pay no attention to you. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. So this to Nebuchadnezzar would have been like an act of treason. That they would have been treasonous against the empire. They were officials in the empire, and they would not worship. They would not bow down. So Nebuchadnezzar was in a furious rage. He commanded that they be brought. They were brought before him, and he asked him, well, is this true? And didn't really give him a chance to answer, and said, well, I'll give you one more chance. We'll play the music again, and if you will bow down, great, all will be forgiven. But if you won't, you'll be thrown into this fiery furnace. And then what does he say? And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Kind of the same thing when you had Assyria come before the walls of Jerusalem and was telling the people there in Hezekiah's day, what God has delivered any other nation out of our hands, and you think your God's going to be able to? And then God sent one angel and killed the whole army? Our God's able to do that. Our God's able to fight on behalf of his people. And so then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. You're saying, we're not going to give a big long defense. They could probably tell the king was enraged, and they knew we're heading for that furnace. They knew that's what was going to happen. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. So they had faith in their God. They knew what God could do. And they trusted that God could do this. And in fact, I got it later on that I quoted it out of Isaiah. But Isaiah 43:2 says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. Maybe they were thinking of that prophecy. Maybe there later in Isaiah was talking to the exiles and talking to them and trying to encourage them, don't give up on God because you're in a foreign nation and it looks like God has been defeated because you have been exiled and all of that. Well, no, you're exiled because of your sin, but still worship God, and God will bring you back. And that's the context of Isaiah 43, that he will bring them back. And so maybe they were thinking of that prophecy as they stood here in front of the king that had exiled them, and here's a big fire that they could walk through, that God is able, and he will rescue us. And then we see such words of courage from them. They said, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Even if God would not rescue them, even if they didn't have that passage in Isaiah, said, no, we will not worship. We won't do it. We won't bow down to foreign gods. We will not do this. You see, only God is worthy of worship. Only our God is worthy of worship. If we put our worship on anything else, be it a statue of gold, some false god, put it on money, put it on fame, put it on success, put it on anything else, that'll fail you. Nothing else is worthy of our worship but God alone. Only God is worthy of worship. And also, God is greater than any king. Anyone that we would face anytime, say if we weren't in America where we have freedom of religion, if we were, say, in China where faithful Christians can be arrested for their faith if they won't join the official Chinese church, or in Sudan where Christians were killed for being Christians, or other places like that, we would see that, you know what, even if we are killed, God is greater than any king. We owe God our allegiance, not anyone else. We are Christians first, and Americans, or insert any other nationality, second. That our allegiance is to Christ first. So then we come to fire and rescue. So then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. He was mad before. He gave them a second chance. They said, no, we won't do it. And so then he was filled with fury. The expression of his face changed against them. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And so this furnace would have been shaped maybe like a beehive, where you'd have an opening at the top and a hole in the side you could put the wood in for the fuel, and maybe even places where they could go with bellows, put more air and get it going hot. And they would use these for smelting metals or melting metals to pour in the molds and those sorts of things. And so he told them, heat this up hot. So you imagine servants going there with bellows, and they start blowing the air in, and they get it burning hot. And he ordered even some of the mighty men of his army to bind him. So not just anybody out of the army to tie him up, but the strongest men that could pull those ropes good and tight, and then cast them into the burning fiery furnace. They were bound in their cloaks and their tunics and their hats and their other garments. And usually a prisoner would be stripped naked before being executed, but this order was so urgent that they were tied up in all of their official clothes and all of that. And they were tied up and brought up to the top, and they fell in. It says in verse 22, because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they were going to throw them in the top opening, and you can imagine they'd get this going. It's outside, not inside. So if they're getting up close to the opening and it is raging, any change of wind that could blow that flame their way, and if they're not protected, then they wouldn't have had some sort of fire suit or anything like that. The fire got them, and even those soldiers were killed, and they fell down into the furnace. But then the king was astonished. he could see through that side door where you put in the wood and all of that. He said, hey, didn't we throw in 3? And everybody around said, well, yeah, we had 3 prisoners. So, well, I see 4. And that they're unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they're not hurt. So instead of writhing in pain or anything like that, they're just walking around, probably amazed. I mean, you could imagine being there for that miracle. And not only that, he saw one who was like a son of the gods. Now, Nebuchadnezzar probably didn't know the doctrine of the Trinity or anything like that, so he probably hears him talking about the Son of God, Jesus, that he recognizes that's who it is. But he can see one of them as a divine being. Whether it was an angel that was there with him, that's what Nebuchadnezzar says later, or maybe this was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, kind of like you see other times where it's the angel of the Lord. You know, we're not sure. But God sent them someone to be with them while they were in the fire. God sent them someone that they wouldn't be alone. And, you know, they're walking around in the fire. The fire burns off the ropes that bound them, but their clothes aren't burning. Their hair isn't singed off or anything like that. And you can imagine walking around, oh, wow, you know, we're in the middle of the fire. And, hey, are you okay, Shadrach? Yeah, I'm fine. How about you? You know, you can just imagine the amazement. They're walking around, and Nebuchadnezzar looks in and sees this. Whoa, you know, what God can save you out of my hand? Well, I guess I got my answer. That their God can. And we see mention of this in Hebrews 11:34 in the Hall of Faith, or the Faith Hall of Fame, however you want to talk about it. It says that they quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, remained strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. And that's where the author of Hebrews just starts listing these that showed their faith. And who quenched the power of fire? That would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had great faith. And also what I mentioned earlier of Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. That this was maybe the promise that they were thinking of when they told Nebuchadnezzar, our God can save us out of this. That he can do it. And then it also reminds us of Revelation 13:15. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So here in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar sets up an image. Anyone who won't worship will be killed. Coming in the future with the Antichrist and the false prophet, an image will be set up that anyone who doesn't worship it will be killed. That there's not many new ideas, and so they'll be rehashing some old ones. Then in the end times, worship or else. Worship this image. Worship the beast or else. But yet, what we can remember is God is with his people in persecution. God doesn't leave you alone. You don't go through hard times alone. You don't go through persecution alone. God is there with his people in persecution, even when we are killed. Because we're not given the promise that any time we're to be killed for our faith, that it won't work. We're not promised if we stand in front of a firing squad that the guns will jam. We're not promised that the electric chair won't work or the lethal injection won't hurt us. We're not given those promises. But yet when we face persecution, God is there with us. That as we give witness to our faith by not denying, God is there with us. And also, no one can overrule God. Nebuchadnezzar showed his blinding arrogance when he said, what God can rescue you out of my hand? No one can overrule God. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't so powerful that there wasn't a God who could save out of his hand. God was able to do it, and he did it. No one can overrule him. Then we see quite the change in Nebuchadnezzar, and we see that he praises God. That he came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He called out for them to come out, and he calls them servants of the Most High God. So Nebuchadnezzar may not yet be a monotheist, only worshiping one God. He still worships a bunch, but he realizes, wow, their God's powerful. Their God was able to do what, my God couldn't have done. And so he calls them servants of the Most High God. And so they came out of the fire. All the people gathered around them together. They saw that the fire didn't have any power over the bodies. They didn't have burns all over them. Their hair wasn't singed. Their cloaks weren't harmed. They didn't even smell like smoke. That the smell of the fire didn't even come upon them. And so Nebuchadnezzar then answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies, rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Nebuchadnezzar realized the great faith of these men and their commitment to their God. And he also realized, oh, their God's powerful. And it says, "Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." And it seems like that was a favorite threat of Nebuchadnezzar's. This is the second time we've seen it. And that maybe he was afraid that God was going to come after him and so, I better make a decree here. But yet, he wanted to make sure people respected the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God would still be working on Nebuchadnezzar. We'll see that next week, that God was working on his pride, that God would bring him down and teach him again that it is God who gives kingdoms and takes away kingdoms and turns the heart of the king, that God can do that. But we also see that the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. That instead of the jealousy of the Chaldeans, leading to their downfall, they were promoted instead. But you see, God will be victorious over every kingdom. Every human kingdom, just like last week we saw the great statue that represented the earthly kingdoms, that God's kingdom, the rock that was cut out without human hands that smashed the feet of the statue, and then the whole statue just broke into little pieces and blew away, and then that rock grew and became a great mountain filling the whole earth. God's kingdom is going to win. God's kingdom will put down all these earthly kingdoms that strive against him, that strive against his people, that try and lift themselves up. God will be victorious over every kingdom. And also, our God can do great things. We worship the creator of the universe, the one that made everything, the one that rescued Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fire, the one who loved us enough that he sent his only son to die in our place upon the cross, that all who believe in him will be saved. And then on the third day, he raised him from the dead. That the great miracle that we see today is God saving sinners. That's a great miracle that we can see today, that even though we deserve God's wrath, even though we deserve hell, that God still saves sinners. Everyone who comes to him in faith will be saved. Everyone who comes to him will be saved. Our God can do great things. He's not just a miracle worker doing neat things like some magician. He is going about redeeming a people for himself upon the earth. He is going about saving sinners, those who rebelled against him, that now are adopted into his family, that are saved, their sins are forgiven, and they have a home in heaven. That God has done great things. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your words you have given us, and thank you for your faithfulness to your promises. Thank you for your love for your people. And Father, I pray that we would be faithful, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, that we would not give in to worshiping anything or anyone but you. And Father, we thank you for your faithfulness in the gospel. We thank you for your promises you have given us, that all who come to you in faith will be saved. And it is in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.